The room went still when Eli stood. He hadn't spoken in hours. Not during the jeers. Not when the youngest drunk slapped the girl's wrist for dropping a tray. Not when Caleb Knox, who owned half the saloon and all the trouble in it, pulled the girl by her apron strings toward the stairs. But when Eli stood, the floorboards seemed to breathe. His boots hit the floor with that slow, final sound that meant something worse than yelling. "No one touches her again," the quiet rancher said, his voice level as a fence rail. His hand never left the gun on his hip. Nobody moved. Not Knox. Not the girl, who froze halfway up the stairs, her bruised wrist dangling like something separate from her. And no one in that room dared ask why a man who hadn't spoken 5 words since spring roundup would draw a line for a saloon girl with dirt on her cheek and a split lip. But let's go back to where it started. It had rained the day before. Not a storm, just a slow, soaking kind, enough to turn dust into something softer and make the leaves on the cottonwoods hum in the wind. Eli Merrick had been driving fence posts alone all morning, sleeves rolled, back bent, and eyes narrowed under a sweat-stained hat. His land stretched flat and wide, the kind of place that swallowed voices and kept secrets. He liked it that way. A few cows grazed near the southern tree line. The sky was pale blue, cloudless, and somewhere out there, a hawk circled. Eli had just bent to check the wire tension when he heard it. A soft sound, not a scream, not a voice, more like the sound of something held in too long, the sharp inhale of someone trying not to cry. He stood still, waited, nothing but wind and the metallic creak of wire. Then, there it was again. Eli followed the sound along the tree line, pushing through brush until he saw her. A girl, no more than 16, maybe 17, barefoot, hair wet from rain or sweat, face turned to the side, one eye swollen half shut. She was trying to stand, one hand gripping a sapling, the other pulling a ripped shawl around her shoulders. She didn't notice him at first, but when she did, she flinched so hard she dropped to her knees again, her hands up like she expected to be hit. Eli didn't move, didn't speak. He just removed his hat. Slowly, the way you do when you're near a grave or something sacred. "You hungry?" he asked after a moment. His voice was like boots on gravel. Low, steady, almost unsure. The girl didn't answer. "Can't stay here," he added, glancing at the gray smear of clouds gathering toward the west. Still nothing. Just that same look, not fear exactly. More like she didn't trust the idea of kindness anymore. Eli stepped back, gave her space. "I got a place north of here. It's quiet. You can rest. Just rest." She blinked, then nodded, not at him, but at the tree beside her, like she needed permission from something older than both of them. Eli didn't touch her, just walked a few steps ahead, slow enough that she could follow without feeling followed. By the time they reached his barn, her legs gave out. He caught her, barely, and carried her the rest of the way. She weighed almost nothing. That had been 2 days ago. She still hadn't told him her name. He hadn't asked again. He'd left a blanket, a piece of cornbread, and a canteen in the loft. When he returned at nightfall, the food was gone. The blanket was folded. She was asleep in the hay, curled tight, like something that knew not to take up space. Eli didn't sleep much that night, kept thinking about the bruises, the shape of them, the way her shoulder had jerked when he moved too fast with the lantern. He'd seen marks like that before. Once, back when his sister had shown up on his porch 5 years ago with a baby on her hip and blood on her temple. She hadn't said a word, just handed him the child, then walked inside and slept for 2 straight days. That sister was gone now. Fever last winter. The baby, now 6, lived in town with the pastor's wife. Eli visited sometimes, left little wooden horses on the windowsill, but he hadn't let anyone in since. Not until the girl under the hayloft stairs. By the 3rd morning, she came down without hiding. Still quiet, still careful, but something in her shoulders had changed. Eli was fixing tack when she approached. She held out a small bundle, his shirts, cleaned and folded. She must have found the washboard. He met her eyes. Just for a second. "You can stay till you're ready," he said. She nodded once, then turned to sweep the floor like she'd already made herself part of the place. That night, He rode into town for supplies. He wasn't planning to stop at the saloon, but he owed Billings for a debt, and Billings drank at the table near the back window. Eli found him quick, paid him, and was turning to leave when he saw her. The girl. She was carrying a tray, hair tied back, same shawl, but the color in her face was gone. She moved too fast, too careful. And Caleb Knox was watching her like she was something he'd already bought. When she tripped and spilled a drink, the man beside her laughed and slapped her wrist. She flinched, and Knox stood. "Girl like that oughta learn manners upstairs," he said to the room. The crowd laughed. Eli didn't. He just stood and said it. "No one touches her again." The room held its breath. Knox stared at him, then at the hand resting on the rancher's holster. The girl didn't move. She was staring down, her chest rising and falling too fast. No one drew. No one spoke. Then, with a scoff, Knox raised both hands like he was done playing. "Suit yourself. Didn't know you liked used." Eli didn't respond. He just walked to the stairs and waited. The girl came down slow, and when she reached him, he tipped his hat toward the door. She followed, and the saloon stayed quiet long after they were gone. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. She didn't ask questions, and Eli didn't offer words. Her hands were folded in her lap, pressed tight like they might fly apart if she let go. Her eyes flicked to the window every time a lantern passed or a rider galloped by. When they reached the gate, Eli swung down and opened it, letting the wagon pass through. She turned her head then, just slightly, taking in the way the barn stood solid against the night sky, the way the porch lamp flickered like someone was still waiting up. He didn't ask her what happened in town. He didn't need to. The next morning, she was already in the barn when he came out, sweeping out the corners. She didn't speak, but she didn't flinch either. When he handed her a tin cup of coffee, her fingers brushed his, and she didn't pull away. Later, as he saddled his horse, she lingered in the barn doorway. "You going to town again?" she asked. Her voice was small but steady. "Not today," Eli replied. She nodded, then looked down. "Thank you." He didn't say "you're welcome." He just tipped his hat and went to work. But the town wasn't finished with her. By sundown, news had traveled like dry grass on fire. Knox wasn't a man to forget a slight, especially not in front of his men, and especially not when it cost him a girl he considered his property. The first sign came 2 days later. Eli was branding a calf near the stream when he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Not wild, not fast, just deliberate, slow, heavy. 3 men, all armed, all wearing the same dust of the Knox ranch. They stopped just outside the gate, not bothering to tie off their horses. Eli didn't invite them in. One of them, a big man with a crooked hat and a scar under his chin, leaned forward in his saddle. "You got something don't belong to you, Merrick." Eli didn't flinch. "This is my land." The man smiled. "Ain't talking about the land." Another rider, younger, meaner, spat. "That girl. She was working for Mr. Knox. And Mr. Knox don't take kindly to thieves." "She ain't property," Eli said. "Maybe not to you," the first man answered. "But you're about to find out how this works, rancher. You don't bring her back to town by Sunday night. We come get her ourselves." The youngest grinned. "Maybe we take something else while we're at it." Eli stepped forward. Not fast, just deliberate. He didn't touch his gun. Not yet, but his hand was close enough, and his eyes didn't blink. The men read that silence. Even Knox's boys weren't eager to test it. "We'll be back," the lead rider muttered. "With more." And they turned without another word, the dust from their horses clouding the air like smoke before a fire. That night, Eli sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap. The girl brought him coffee without asking. She didn't ask what they said, but she must have known. "Should I go?" she asked softly, standing behind him in the dark. Eli looked out at the land, the fence lines, the stars. "They're not coming for you," he said. There was a long pause. "But if they do," she whispered. He turned then, met her eyes. "They'll wish they hadn't." The next morning, the town was different. Quiet, watchful. At the general store, the air felt thin. People looked away when Eli walked in. A woman dropped her sack of flour when she saw the girl standing behind him. No one helped her pick it up. Mrs. Finch, who usually talked through every price, just nodded and said, "Cash or trade?" without meeting his gaze. It was the pastor who finally spoke up. "Eli, a word?" They stepped outside. The girl stayed by the feed sacks. "You've always kept to yourself," the pastor began. "But what you're doing now, bringing that girl back here, the town's not built for this kind of trouble." Eli didn't respond. "She's not safe here," the pastor continued. "Not because of her, but because of them. You understand?" Eli looked back toward the girl. She was watching him now, not with fear, but with something heavier. Like she already knew how people would see her. Like she'd lived this before. "She's staying," he said quietly. "Even if it brings blood?" "If it does," Eli said, "it won't be hers." By sundown, the town had chosen sides. Some whispered that Eli had gone soft. Others remembered what happened to the man who once tried to steal one of his horses, and how Eli had waited 3 days just to bring the man's hat back to his widow. But nobody, not even Knox, could say for sure how far Eli Merrick would go for someone he'd claimed. That's when the sheriff showed up, just before dusk, hut in hand, horse tired from the ride. He didn't dismount, just waited near the gate until Eli came out. "I ain't here to arrest you," the sheriff said. "Ain't even here on Knox's word." Eli crossed his arms. "But you gotta know, Knox is stirring up the others, the ranchers. He says she's lying, says she stole from him. She didn't. Don't matter, Eli. The truth don't always carry the most guns." Eli looked past him toward the horizon, where a smear of dark clouds had begun to gather. "They coming tonight?" The sheriff sighed. "Wouldn't surprise me." He paused. "I'll do what I can. But if they ride out here, I won't be able to stop them." Eli didn't blink. "Then I won't wait." And he turned toward the barn, where the girl was standing in the shadows, holding the broom like a weapon. The storm wasn't in the sky. It was already here. The wind picked up just after midnight. Not a storm wind, but the kind that carries warning, sharp, restless, moving through the trees like something searching for you. Eli stood by the barn door, oil lantern flickering in one hand, Winchester in the other. The cattle were uneasy, the horses restless. The girl didn't sleep. She sat by the stove, knees drawn up to her chest, blanket over her shoulders. Her hair had dried into soft waves, but her eyes never stopped watching the door. A single owl called out in the distance. Then silence. Eli lowered the lantern's flame and moved to the window. The kind of silence outside wasn't natural. No insects. No creaking trees. Even the dogs weren't barking. Then hoofbeats. Not loud. Not fast. But heavy. Organized. Riders. He counted at least 8. Maybe 10. Moving slow, fanned out across the ridge above his land. He didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. Knox had brought men. Likely drunk. Likely eager. But not stupid. They knew Eli's aim was clean. That's why they hadn't come charging in. They wanted a show of force. A bluff. Or something close enough to blood they could call it justice. The girl stood up behind him. "Should I hide?" He turned to her. Shook his head once. "You did nothing wrong." She nodded, throat moving like it hurt to swallow. She clutched the blanket tighter, but her back straightened. Eli stepped onto the porch. The moonlight revealed them. 9 men on horseback, rifles slung. Knox at the front, hat low, smirking like he'd already won. "Evening, Merrick," Knox called out. "Heard you've got something in there that don't belong to you." Eli didn't answer. Knox nudged his horse forward. "Now I could have let this go. Could have forgotten she walked out on me. But you made a spectacle. In front of everyone." "She walked out," Eli said, voice steady. "That's not theft." "She was under contract," Knox snapped. "I fed her, housed her. She worked off a debt. Then you took her. She was bleeding when I found her." Knox leaned in the saddle, eyes narrowing. "She was trouble before she came to me. You know what she did before this town? Left a family in Kansas. Ran off. No husband. No name. She's nothing, Merrick. She don't deserve the kind of protection you're offering." Eli's jaw clenched. His fingers curled tighter around the stock of the rifle. "She's under my roof now," he said, slowly. "And you know what happens when you cross that line." Knox's grin slipped. "You really gonna draw over a saloon girl?" "She's not a saloon girl," Eli said. A few of the men shifted in their saddles. One of them, a rancher Eli recognized from church, looked away like he'd just remembered what kind of man he used to be. Then Knox turned mean. "You let her stay, Merrick? She'll ruin you. You'll lose contracts. Supply lines. We'll make sure no one buys your cattle come spring. And she won't be worth what it cost." Eli didn't look away. "She already is." The moment froze. 10 riders. One man on a porch. A girl behind the door. Then Knox raised his hand. But before he could signal anything, another voice rang out. "You boys done making fools of yourselves?" Everyone turned. The sheriff rode up alone, his horse lathered from the sprint. His coat wasn't buttoned, and his hat looked like it had been pulled on mid-run. "You know what this is?" he shouted, slowing his horse as he neared. "It's not justice. It's not a recovery. It's a lynching dressed up like debt collection." He rode straight toward Knox. "You come out here with 9 rifles because a girl said no? Because Eli said no?" He stopped and pointed at each man in turn. "Every one of you knows what happened in that saloon. You saw it. She was being dragged. And not one of you did a damn thing until he did." Knox opened his mouth, but the sheriff cut him off. "She's not going back. And neither are you, unless you want me to wire the marshal and report a full assault by dawn." The riders looked at one another. The weight of what they were about to do started sinking in. No reward. No honor. Just a black mark on their soul and maybe a rope around their neck if they got unlucky. Knox spat. "This ain't over." "No," Eli said, stepping forward again, the barrel of his rifle catching the moonlight. "It's over when you stop trying to own people." Knox hesitated, then turned his horse. The others followed, slow at first, then faster, like men who just remembered they had something decent left in them. When they disappeared over the ridge, the sheriff exhaled hard and turned to Eli. "You got any whiskey?" Eli gave a small nod. The sheriff dismounted and stretched his back. "Good, because I just burned every bridge with Knox, and I'll need something to sleep." Inside, the girl hadn't moved from the corner. But when Eli walked in, her eyes were different. Not wide with fear, not sunken with silence, but lit, just a little, with something close to belief. She whispered, "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged. "Set the rifle down." "Yeah," he said. "I did." The girl spoke for the first time over dinner. Not just a few words, but a full sentence that stopped Eli mid-chew. "My name's Clara." The stew between them was plain, beans, potatoes, a little salt pork, but her voice made it feel like something more sacred. Eli didn't say anything right away, just nodded once and passed her a chunk of bread like it was the most natural thing in the world. She took it with both hands. That night, she sat on the porch while he whittled a scrap of cedar into a shape that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. Her shoulders were still tense, but something had shifted in her posture, like she was no longer bracing for the worst, just waiting to see if the good might last. "You ever had a real home?" Eli asked, his voice barely more than gravel under wind. Clara shook her head. "Bits and pieces. Never stayed long." He nodded. "My folks were gone before I turned 10, she added. "One winter, wagon tipped on a frozen creek. After that, I just sort of kept going. Kansas, then Missouri, then here." Eli didn't ask what happened in between. Her eyes told enough of it. She glanced at him. "Why'd you help me?" He didn't look up from his carving. "Didn't seem like you had anyone else." Clara stared out at the prairie, the moonlight painting her face soft and pale. "I didn't." After a long pause, she said quietly, "You ever lost someone?" He stopped carving. "Yeah." She waited, but he didn't say more. That was fine. She knew not all grief had words. Some just settled into your bones and stayed there. Then, as if she were passing back something equal in weight, Clara added, "My baby girl was born last spring. Lived 2 days." Eli looked at her then, full on, not with pity, just something deep, something that said, I see you. He didn't offer comfort, just silence, the kind that mattered more than anything spoken. Over the next few days, the house changed. Not by design, just small things. A shawl draped over the rocker, an extra plate at the table, a soft humming from the kitchen while Clara peeled potatoes. She still startled at loud noises, still tensed when horses rode too fast near the property. But she smiled more. Not big, not bright, just enough to make Eli stop what he was doing and watch without meaning to. One morning, she handed him a cup of coffee and said, "I'd like to plant something." He blinked. "What?" "A garden. Out back. Near the well." He nodded. Slow. "All right." And just like that, a row of dirt became something more. Tomatoes. Beans. Squash. It wasn't much, but it was hers. He built her a small bench from scrap wood and left it by the rows without saying anything. She saw it, sat on it, and didn't say anything either. That evening, she told him about the first time she saw snow. Her voice was softer then, wrapped in memory. He just listened, the way men do when they're learning the shape of someone else's life. Then the letter came, folded into thirds, left by the gate. No name, just scrawled ink. "You think she's safe now? She ain't. You made her our business. She'll never rest here." Eli burned the paper in the stove and said nothing, but he reinforced every door that night, slept with the rifle by his bed, and in the morning, he laid a second revolver on the table and pushed it toward Clara. She stared at it. "I've never shot one." He didn't speak, just pulled open a drawer, took out 5 bullets, and placed them beside the gun. She picked one up, turned it over in her fingers. "You don't have to be fast," he said. "Just sure." Clara nodded. The weight of it settled into her palm like it belonged there now. By the weekend, a stranger rode onto the land. Not fast, not armed, just a lean man in a brown coat, holding his hat in one hand like he knew the way trouble brewed. Eli met him at the gate. "You Merrick?" "I am." "I'm not here for her," the man said quickly. "I'm from Ridge Hollow. Name's Dawson. We heard what happened. Figured you should know. Knox is stirring up something bigger." Eli's eyes narrowed. "He's meeting with some riders out near Black Mesa. Not town men. Paid guns. Says if the law won't fix it, he will." Eli's jaw tightened. "When?" "Tomorrow night, far as we know." Eli looked back toward the house, where Clara stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself against the wind. "You got a place to ride back to?" Eli asked. Dawson nodded. "North Ridge." Eli handed him a scrap of paper. "Take this to Sheriff Ayers. Tell him it's happening. Tell him to come heavy." Dawson took the note, mounted up, and rode out. Eli watched until he was gone, then turned to Clara. She didn't ask, just walked over and rested her hand on his arm. "I'm not running again," she said. He nodded once. "I wouldn't let you." The morning came soft and gray. Low clouds skimmed the tops of the cottonwoods, and the air smelled like iron and coming rain. The earth felt too still, like something was holding its breath. Clara stood barefoot in the kitchen, braiding her hair back in silence. Her hands moved with slow precision, like it mattered now to look like herself. Not someone broken, not someone running, just Clara. Eli stepped inside, brushed the dirt from his coat, and leaned his rifle beside the door. He watched her for a moment, the quiet way she tied off the braid, wiped her hands on her skirt, and looked out the window like she could already hear the hoofbeats. "They'll come tonight," he said. She nodded. "I know. I can ride you out, if you want," he added after a moment. "Far edge of the range. It's thick with trees. You could hide till this passes." Clara turned and looked at him, not with fear, not with anger, but with something steadier. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. They stood like that for a long while. The only sound was the ticking of the mantel clock and the distant wind through dry grass. Then Eli reached over to the shelf, pulled down a small leather satchel, and handed it to her. "What's this?" "Bullets. Jerky. Flint. Just in case." She smiled faintly. "You think of everything." He didn't answer, just returned to the porch where his rifle leaned and the horizon waited. By noon, the sheriff hadn't come. Clara sat on the porch, carving a thin stick with the same whittling knife Eli used. She wasn't trying to make anything, just needed something for her hands. Her breath stayed even, but her pulse betrayed her in her neck. Eli came up behind her and set a fresh pot of coffee on the railing. "If we make it through tonight," he said quietly, "we'll plant another row. More beans." Clara smiled. "And carrots." He nodded. Neither of them mentioned the fact that they hadn't seen another soul in 2 days, that the trail to town had gone quiet, that even the birds seemed to be staying low. By dusk, the wind changed. The air turned sharp, like it had teeth. Eli checked every corner of the barn, every round loaded, the rifle cleaned, the revolver beside Clara's bed oiled and within reach. When night fell, they didn't light the lanterns. Just the stove, low and glowing red like a heart beating slow and steady. They waited. Together, Clara sat at the table, fingers curled tight around her cup. Eli paced, silent, watching every shadow shift across the floorboards. Then, the sound came. Not hoofbeats this time. Not yet. First, it was the soft snap of a twig. Then another. Then silence. Clara's breath caught. Eli moved to the window. 3 silhouettes emerged from the trees, 2 on foot, 1 on horseback, rifle resting low across the saddle horn. They weren't Knox's usual men. Their coats were longer, their steps quieter. One of them was chewing a toothpick like he had all the time in the world. Eli opened the door. The one on the horse stepped forward. "Evenin'," he drawled. "You Eli Merrick?" "I am. Name's Keen. Mr. Knox hired me and my friends here to settle a matter. Said you were keeping something that belonged to him." Eli's eyes narrowed. "You got papers?" Keen chuckled. "Don't need papers. Got payment." He dismounted slowly. The others stayed behind, flanking either side of the house. "You see," Keen continued, voice oily smooth, "a man pays us to bring back a girl. We do that. You get to go on Ranchin. No harm done." Inside, Clara moved behind the door, quiet as breath. Eli stepped forward 1 pace. His voice dropped into something colder than the night air. "She's not going anywhere with you." Keen raised an eyebrow. "So it's that kind of job." He smiled, tapping the butt of his revolver. "Fine by me. Just wish you'd said so sooner." Eli didn't blink. Then another voice called out from behind the barn. "Drop it." A beam of lantern light flared to life, and suddenly the shadows scattered. The sheriff stepped into view, rifle raised, 6 deputies behind him, rifles gleaming. "I'd listen to him if I were you." "Keen," Sheriff Ayres said. "You and your boys are outnumbered, and out of state jurisdiction." Keen held still. The man behind him started to draw, but before the gun even cleared leather, a shot cracked through the night. 1 clean bullet from Eli's rifle. The outlaw dropped. Keen froze. The deputies raised their rifles. Clara, still inside, cocked the revolver in her hands. A stillness settled over the clearing. Finally, Keen held up both hands. "All right," he muttered. "You made your point." The sheriff stepped forward. "You've got 5 seconds to get off this land. Next time you show up, you won't be leaving." Keen mounted up, jaw tight. "You better watch your back, rancher," he growled at Eli. "Ain't every girl worth this much trouble?" Eli said nothing, just watched until the riders disappeared into the black. Then he turned, stepped inside the house. Clara hadn't moved from the doorframe. Her hands still clutched the revolver, shaking now, not from fear, but from the aftershock of being brave too long. Eli gently reached for her hand and lowered the gun. "It's done," he said. Tears gathered in her eyes. "You stayed." "So did you," he whispered. And for the first time since she'd walked barefoot onto his land, Clara leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest. Not with desperation, not for rescue, just to be held, just to be still. And Eli put his arms around her like that was where they'd always belonged.